It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman, and you can find me at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting if you email me at oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. Our guest today is D. Knight, is fellow Bronx boy, my friend, Mr. Knight, okay? I'm born in the Bronx myself. Now, he's written the book called A Realistic Path to Peace, From Genocide to Global War and How We Can Stop It. Now, I found out about Mr. Knight by checking out the Covert Action magazine, and there's an article on it called 2 New Books Explore Pernicious Impact of U.S. Intelligence Agencies. And he's taken some of the material from that article, and he's put it in his book over here, and it's a chapter called Why It's So Hard to Stop the U.S. War Machine. You can find D. Knight at his website, realpathtopeace.com. Mr. D. Knight, are you there?
I'm here. Happy to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. So tell us about yourself. Who is D. Knight?
Well, I've been an anti-warrior for my entire adult life, spanning back to the mid-'60s, specifically to 1968. I was an editor of Amex Canada, which was a newsletter of American exiles and expatriates who went to Canada in resistance to the Vietnam War. Before I wrote Realistic Path to Peace, I wrote my own political memoir, My Whirlwind Lives, Navigating Decades of Storms. Basically that tells of all the different adventures in attempting to stop the U.S. war machine, which are starting to have some effect. The chapter that attracted you, Ed, to my work is called Why It's So Hard to Stop the U.S. War Machine, and it tells some of the roots of the problem. But I can say with some optimism, if not relief, that things are happening that are causing the U.S. war machine to falter, and I do believe we can stop it, and that certainly is the focus and message of my book.
The audience should know, too, as well, that you were behind the scenes working on amnesty for Vietnam protesters who escaped to Canada, right?
That's correct, yes. I was a board member, a founding board member of the National Council for Universal Unconditional Amnesty, which waged a campaign from the early 1970s right up to the inauguration of Jimmy Carter in 1977, when we actually won a partial victory that included a full pardon for draft resistors, a process to discharge without punishment for military resistors, but left out Vietnam veterans, which was a primary focus. And I can say that I and people I work with, like Jerry Condon, have been working to win rights for veterans right up to the present day. Yes.
Gotcha. I really encourage people to check out realpathtopeace.com. And the book we're going to be talking about today is A Realistic Path to Peace, From Genocide to Global War and How We Can Stop It. What are we going to find in this book here? And by the way, D. Knight is spelled D-E-E-K-N-I-G-H-T, D. Knight. What are we going to find here in this book, A Realistic Path to Peace?
Well, it's a comprehensive look at the U.S. war disasters right now, starting with the genocidal slaughter in Palestine, going through the Ukraine conflict, which I call U.S. and NATO proxy war against Russia. In both of those, there are several chapters fully documented. One of the things that I really tried to do is confront the propaganda with a documented case for what's actually happening, and explain why there's a difference between the official narrative and what's actually going on. Then I moved to the emergence of a peace movement, which had been really dormant for quite a long time. I also focus in a whole section with, I think, 7 chapters on China, saying China is not our enemy. And the article that got your attention is part of a section that is what makes the war machine so monstrous. And this chapter, why it's so hard to stop the U.S. war machine. I also look at the past, looking backward to how dissenting soldiers have been really the key part, the fundamental part of what made it possible to stop the U.S. war in Vietnam alongside the Vietnamese resistance. And in the final chapters, I really look at what can be done today to stop the war. And it really is a combination of understanding what's really going on and then finding ways to build a movement that actually has the capacity, the mass power to actually stop the war machine. That part is especially relevant today because when I say today, I'm talking about the middle of July of 2024. The 75th anniversary celebration of NATO just took place in Washington, D.C., with several major announcements, including that they want to finally include Hawaii as part of NATO because they are conducting gigantic naval war games in the Pacific called RIMPAC, involving most of the NATO countries and many other countries in the Pacific Rim, basically warming up for war against China. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me stop there and let you ask the next question.
Yeah, when you say that you're confident and you're encouraged by a resurgence of the anti-war movement, are you talking about this movement of these students against the genocide in Gaza?
That's that's one of the things.
Okay. That's
an indicator rather than the real thing. There's a chapter in my book on the situation in Palestine with the Israeli slaughter called What Does Strategic Defeat Look Like? And it goes into the fact that in spite of the massive killings in Palestine, as well as what is looking like nearly an endless war in Ukraine, defeat is what the United States is looking at, and there's a reason for that. They bit off more than they can chew, and the world situation is different. The lights have not gone out on the empire, but the fact that it is overextended, that it has not been able to make it possible for Israeli genocide against Palestine lead to wiping out the Palestinian resistance. And even though they're doubling down with more weapons and threatening invasion and even targeting rockets inside Russia, they have not been able to reduce the ruble to rubble or to defeat Russia, and they're not likely to. And even though they at the NATO conference, there was a lot of noise about containment of China. China is hard to contain, and it's not because China wants either to have a war with the United States or the West or replace them. China has a right to development and has managed to come up with policies that are very welcome around the world, and it's kind of an unstoppable situation. One of the things that caused me to focus on this chapter, why it's so hard to stop the U.S. war machine, is because it really details how credibility for the U.S. government and for NATO is much lower now than it has ever been. That's an interesting thing and something that needs to be looked at. but it's not really new. What's new is that the United States and its vassal states in NATO have not really been able to make it stick. They're losing the power to impose domination, and that's a very big deal. And of course, one of the things I hope to do is make people understand how that has happened and how it's likely to lead to possibilities for peace.
Well, but then, okay, try and make me feel better. Try and encourage me. Because people have heard me on the radio lately, like, I'm on the ledge, man. I'm ready to jump. I'm ready to give up. To me, it looks like we have the perfect storm for fascism right around the corner, man, and we're in big trouble. And when you say that, we're just so encouraged, man, I love to hear that. But when I look at the situation, I see the most insane military power in the history of the earth, the greatest military budget, air superiority all over the world. The U.S. oil industry is just unbridled. It can't be stopped. All these military-industrial complex is just so overwhelming. They control the media. They control the CIA. But what did and I asked, I said, you're encouraged by some kind of a path to peace. What is it? What do you see that I don't see?
That's a very, very good question, and it is hard to see it.
Yeah.
But one of the things about the current situation is that more and more, really millions of people in this country are now realizing that the game has been stacked against us for a long time. And, for example, at the NATO conference, Biden shouted out how we are protecting democracy in Ukraine. They never had democracy since the United States overthrew the democratic elected government there in 2014, and they've been bolstering a fascist government there ever since. But what we have here is a situation where we've got a duopoly, one fascist going against a fascist sponsor who is not able to keep his speeches coherent and is living in a fantasy land. What does that mean for ordinary people? It means that we've got to find a new way to take away their desire to continue with constant, endless wars. What do we do with that? Well, we'll have to make the anti-war movement of the 60s look like a Boy Scout picnic. We've got to make it much, much bigger. And there have been signs. For example, now very large sections of the labor movement are calling for ceasefire in Palestine, and they're calling also for ceasefire and negotiations in Ukraine. Many people already have said, no, we don't want more ships and threats in the South China Sea. We don't want to see NATO expanded to the Pacific. We want to change this. We don't want to be supporting 800 U.S. military bases around the world, all of them draining money from what we need here. So, in a way, it had to get really bad before it could get better. And what I try to do in the book is describe a formula and a game plan through which we can oppose the war machine and find a path to both democracy and peace that goes around and outside of a bogus electoral system that is really designed to prevent democracy here at home and around the world.
Oh, yeah, and both parties are capitalists anyways. They have their own interests, man. So then
it's big. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Well, what I was going to say is it's big money that rules here, and what we know is that we haven't had a shot at even choosing a candidate in a very long time. And the last time we did, the machine came in to put a stop to it. That was back in 2016.
Yeah.
So, that's 8 years ago. But in fact, one of the things for me about having been in this struggle for 50 years is I've seen it over and over again. This time, however, I believe that there's a shot at doing a better job of stopping the war machine, if for no other reason than we have no choice.
Well, then let me ask you this, because it would appear to me that the average citizen out there, the average guy, especially the average guy watching Fox News, okay, or getting their news from Elon Musk on Twitter, they would say, Mr. Knight, what are you talking about? We need a strong defense. In fact, when Obama was in power, he gutted the military, and our military was broke. We had no arms. we had no army back then. When the Democrats get in, and peace through strength, and we need to increase the budget. I think, right? So that's the average person. What the average person is saying. Who are these people you're seeing that are out there who have lost confidence in the U.S. imperialism?
Well, the numbers are not huge of the people in the federal government who have resigned in protest recently, but they also include a substantial and increasing number of active duty soldiers, both ground pounders and commissioned officers who are saying no. Why are they saying no? For the same reasons that really tens of thousands of soldiers who were in Iraq and Afghanistan came back realizing that they had been duped. And it's true that America's no longer able to exert the strength that it once did across the globe. But in fact, what has happened is that active duty soldiers have seen the light and realized that they have been sold a bill of goods, and they're saying no. One of the things that the no to NATO protests in Washington highlighted was the what's it called? The redress movement, in which soldiers by the dozens and hundreds are moving to get conscientious objector status and send letters to their Congress people saying, this is the wrong way, we don't want to do it, and we want you to get us out of here. So far, the people in Congress, as well as ordinary people on the street, have not seen it. However, more and more people are seeing it. And you could say that my voice is a canary voice that's been down in the depths of the mine, seeing what's going on and saying there's an explosion coming. But it's an explosion in which people are essentially doing whatever they can to actually stop the war machine themselves.
It's interesting because even people on the extreme right, the Trump supporters, they don't want the war in Ukraine. I think it's mostly an economic motivation there. But they know that the system's rigged. They know that the elections are, you know what I mean? They know that we're not getting a fair shake. But they don't. Their solution is fascism. And historically the reaction to inflation has always been fascism. So you don't see us going further off the cliff?
I think fascism is a very real possibility. We're looking down the barrel of a fascist presidency, and that, of course, is a tragedy and a crime. But it's something that the people of the country are going to have to live through and learn to deal with. Already there's a call for a united front against fascism. And essentially what it proposes to do is put the people who have been hurt already together with people who are starting to wake up and say no. It won't be able to use much of the electoral system for what has to happen. It's more likely to be essentially new politics, whether it's a combination of strikes and protests and other kinds of action that literally stop the war machine, mass renunciations of government figures, of government staff, and most importantly, mass refusals of active duty soldiers and sailors. Mm-hmm. It's interesting to note, speaking of active duty soldiers and sailors, that we've got close to 500,000. I think the most recent number is 400,000 active duty American soldiers and sailors stationed in what they call the Pacific Theater, basically aimed at China. Those people are sitting ducks in an unwinnable war situation. They're being used as threats against China now, but one of the things that the war gamers in the Pentagon and in the Rand Corporation have discovered is every time they have a war game to figure out how they can move against China, they find that the U.S. side is the losing side. They're trying to change that, but what is it doing? It's essentially betting the future of the United States on an unwinnable situation that is totally unnecessary. The people who say we need a stronger military haven't yet woken up to the fact that the whole economy is focused on the military-industrial complex. The weapons makers are making profits hand over fist even now from these crazy and unwinnable wars in the Ukraine and the Middle East, as well as the giant armada in the Far East. And what's it doing? Essentially, it's draining money that's needed desperately here to rebuild the economy, to have real jobs, as well as to rebuild the infrastructure here. Check it out. China has fast trains, and I'm talking super fast trains. I was on one just the other day that connect hundreds of its major cities spanning across the country. They have 36 state-of-the-art subway systems in all their major cities. What does this mean? It means that instead of investing in war, they've been investing in infrastructure and in social services. And by the way, that's a win for them and a loss for us. We need the same thing, but we can't get it if all the money's going into the war machine. So the people that you speak of who say, well, we just have to get stronger, have more war machine, it's a self-defeating strategy, and one that can change, but it'll take pressure from below to make it happen.
The thing is, though, like in China, they have nationalized oil industry. Okay, we're here in America. Yeah. If people were sitting on the train, they couldn't sell them a gallon of gas every 5 minutes. You know what I mean?
And not only that, as a result of the nationalized oil economy there, China is now the world leader in green technology. It's realistically committed to transforming to renewable energy across the entire economy. And part of the result of that is that China has more produces more electric cars than anyone else in the world. In fact, China's auto industry is the biggest in the world. But when I was there, I noticed traffic on the streets of Shanghai and Beijing is quiet because over half the cars are electric. And it's really quite an amazing thing. It can be done, but you do have to have a situation where the decisions about what to produce are controlled as part of a national program. They have an industrial policy. We don't. And that's a big deal. People that want to rebuild industry and jobs in this country need to look at what China has done and think, well, what could we do that's like that? And it's very possible. Obviously, there's way more than enough opportunity to rebuild the infrastructure here. But interestingly, neither the banks nor the government can identify the investment funds to do it because the profitable investments are all in war materials. That can change. We have to demand it change, but we're going to have to do more than merely demand it. We're going to have to make it happen.
And then what would we do? Like back to the old carrying signs and marching and sit-ins? Is that what we would do?
Well, that's only part of it. You know, inevitably, if you're going to get people's attention to the possibility of people's power, you're going to have to be out in the streets with signs and stuff like that, but you're also going to have to do a whole lot of other things. You know, building an industrial policy, perhaps most of all, would be something that would engage the labor unions that have been largely sidelined, but still are out there fighting for a chance. UAW has been increasing dramatically in the recent couple of years, and it needs to increase more. I mean, the auto industry in this country used to be entirely unionized. Now it's not, and that's going to change. That'll be part of it, and part of that surge in union power will have to be calling for the rebuilding of basic industry. You know, this country used to produce the largest amount of steel as well as other industrial materials in the world. That has changed. It can change back, but it takes people fighting for it, you know, and it won't be enough to try to do it with elections to Congress. Right now we have a Congress that is totally controlled, bought and paid for by a combination of the Israel lobby and the military-industrial complex, as well as big oil and big pharma. And that has to change, but it can only change with a large-scale popular movement.
Well, you put faith in the unions, but the unions would have to know that a solution to this oppression we live under would be a national strike. We will stop working. You shut the country down. You know, the workers, you know, that run this country would take over. So they're not stupid. They know this, but they're in the pockets of these same capitalists.
Well, it's a process of change. And it's necessary to look at certain things that have already happened in order both to see the challenge as well as the possibility. You mentioned before the student encampments on several hundred campuses across the country. It almost came out of nowhere, except when you really think about it, it was logical. These people were seeing horrifying images on their telephone screens day after day, and they're still seeing them. When they protest saying, you know, free, free Palestine, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, they were accused of anti-Semitism and threatened with expulsion and suspension. Some were thrown in jail. Faculty members that supported them were in some cases fired, suspended, thrown in jail. But it didn't stop them. That's the thing to bear in mind. And that's a lesson that's, you know, to a large degree lost because of what I say in this chapter, why it's so hard to stop the war machine. There is a lie machine that goes with the war machine that seeks to essentially erase and cause a loss of memory of any and all success stories of people actually stopping the war machine. And this is built in. This is built in to both the government and the mainstream media. You know, my opening sentence is in the chapter on why it's so hard to stop the U.S. war machine, say credibility is low these days for the U.S. government, politicians, and the mainstream media. Sorting through news reports for reliable fact and analysis would make George Orwell weak. And, it goes on. And it details some of the information that's coming out. For example, the authors of The Untold History of the United States talk about the author of American Exception as digging deep into the pernicious impact of intelligence and security forces and their role in undermining U.S. integrity as a country. And we really need to see that the current candidates for leadership, one a fascist, the other just a monstrous liar who's leading us to defeat across the world, they're part of a state of exception when government leaders suspend normal laws and govern by decree. Was there a vote on sending massive amounts of weapons to either Israel or Ukraine? I challenge you to find where people really have called for these things. In fact, what we see is that they've done most of it in secret. And why do they do that? It's because they know they can only lie to get done what they want to get done. And we can expose those lies, and we can change the story. We have to know, however, what it is we're looking at. This book I mentioned on American Exception talks about a guardian elite. That is high-ranking officials who are in on the state secrets, and they decide what the public may and may not know. And they plan and authorize covert operations, foreign and domestic and surveillance, and other espionage and intelligence activities. And they actually suspend legal restraints on what they have decided behind closed doors to do. They've been doing it for a long time, but now the results have been more disastrous than ever. And looking back to when I came in during the Vietnam War, we were able to force a stop because the whole thing was so disastrous. It's worth knowing, for example, that back in November 1963, when Henry Cabot Lodge joined with the CIA to put an end to Ngo Dinh Diem, the U.S. puppet leader in South Vietnam, it was actually 3 weeks later that JFK was assassinated in Dallas. And what we've seen since then is that miraculously and wonder of wonders, essentially right after he died, his strategy of peace was reversed, and a whole era, not only of war in Vietnam, but also coups and slaughters in large and small countries around the world took place. It was as if, and when I talk about countries around the world, we're not talking about, small countries. We're talking about Brazil. We're talking about Indonesia, half a dozen other countries in South America, Argentina, Chile, Uruguay, Paraguay, Bolivia, Ecuador, and Peru, with just tens of thousands of people killed, hundreds more arrested and imprisoned, 1 million in Indonesia, an equal number in the Republic of the Congo, and on and on. We don't have to live this way, and it's possible to stop this. In fact, what we're seeing now, and this is, going back to what you were saying, how can I be optimistic about what we're seeing now since so much of it is bad news? The bad news is also good news. If the war machine cannot be successful, whether it's in Palestine, Israel, or in Ukraine in the U.S. proxy war against Russia. What it means is that the empire is going to fall and something is going to replace it. Now, you're right that the first thing that's going to replace it is Trump's fascism.
Yes.
And that will bring disaster upon disaster. And it'll be something that we'll have to dig out of it. But that essentially is what I'm saying we can do if we put our shoulders to the wheel to do it. And that's the essence of my concluding chapter in A Realistic Path to Peace.
Okay, we're talking to D. Knight, Deeknight. And I got to tell you something. This man can encourage me. He's doing a great job. I'm probably the most cynical guy out there. Now, the book he wrote is called A Realistic Path to Peace, From Genocide to Global War and How We Can Stop It. And I really encourage people to go to Amazon right now and buy a copy of this book and also a copy of his other book called My Whirlwind Lives, Navigating Decades of Storm. We have to support people that are out there putting their ass on the front line for their whole entire freaking life, okay? If we don't, we will all fall, okay? So we got a real guy here. We need to support his work. Check out his website, realpathtopeace.com. Mr. Knight, you mentioned previously that you were just in China. What were you doing there?
I was invited by a group of journalists called China Academy. They had interviewed me about my work here, and they wanted to have a chance to talk with me in person. I was also touring. You know, it's the second time I visited China. The last time was with my wife last year. We went during the cotton harvest to Xinjiang, of all places. Why would we go to Xinjiang? Because we wanted an eyewitness version with our own eyes, seeing what Michael Pompeo has called genocide. It's interesting, by the way, that neither Biden or Blinken can admit that there's genocide in Palestine, against Palestine, but they continue to talk about genocide in Xinjiang. We wanted to see it. Pompeo had said that there's slavery in the cotton fields of Xinjiang. Xinjiang is the cotton-producing capital of China. We went during the cotton harvest and watched the mechanical harvesters cutting down that crop and sending it in big 3-ton bales for processing and then conversion into clothing. And we also wanted just to see how China works, you know, and it was great because, of course, we were able to take the bullet train from Shanghai to Beijing. Then we flew on from their state-of-the-art airports from Beijing to the capital of Xinjiang. We also went further south and west to Kashgar, an ancient city near the border with Pakistan. It's interesting, Kashgar is halfway between Shanghai and Paris, which is hard for people to imagine because China seems so far away. But this city on the western edge of China is 5,000 kilometers from both Paris and Shanghai. I found that interesting. We also visited one of the big industrial cities, Changsha, in the Hunan province, where they have big steel mills and big auto companies, but they're actually famous as an education city. And what they do is pump out engineers, and those engineers are key to the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, that has essentially been a friendship road from China through the rest of Central Asia, South Asia, into West Asia, also known as the Middle East, and Africa. And I wanted to see that because, you know, if you depend only on U.S. official or media narratives, you'd think that China was coming apart at the seams, what we found is that the Harvard study is true. Over 90% of the population really like what's happening for them in China. They're better off now than they've ever been. And they actually have a model of a mixed economy, and I want to say that it's a mixed economy. It has both socialism and capitalism, and that's an attractive solution for many countries across the world, and could even be attractive for this country. The United States could learn a lot about how to rebuild its infrastructure, implement a public health system that actually doesn't cause bankruptcy across large percentage of the population. By the way, the police there are not armed. I found that I thought that was great. And also, even though they have 55 nationalities as well as the main Han nationality, meaning that in addition to the main Mandarin Chinese language, there are another 55 dialects. They still manage to communicate among themselves in some ways better than we do here. And so I wanted to see all that for myself, as well as meet people and find opportunities through people-to-people contact to forge possibilities for peace. I'm not the only one traveling to China. In fact, they're having millions of people. Not nearly enough people from this country are going, but more and more are. And I think that's a help.
Yeah, I was just talking to a professor yesterday who just got back from Sweden. And he was saying the same thing. And I went over there so happy. They got health care, What about, like, in China? Did the people seem happy? Or were they homeless? What can you tell us about that?
There's no homelessness at all in China. In fact, it's official policy. Everybody has a home. There are people who go away from their home in one place to work in another on a temporary basis. But even they are not homeless. They find ways to live, and they find support. One of the interesting things that happened for me when I was at a hotel in Beijing, it was a very hot day. Beijing has hot days too. I'm talking about 100+ degrees. But I went out for an evening stroll, and I found myself in the middle of a street fair, and old folks were actually dancing in the streets. They had impromptu dance performances going on. And, aside from that, people were walking along, watching the dances, or going to a sidewalk stand to buy a snack or ice cream or other things for sale. One of the things that's happened in recent years, wages have skyrocketed in China. They've doubled and doubled again, so that officially they call it a moderately prosperous socialist country, in which there's people have enough money not merely to eat and put a roof over their heads, but to have a good life. People, because the auto industry has government support, people can afford to buy new cars, and they're buying them. I was walking down the street through these food stands and old folks dance performances, and suddenly I found myself at the entrance to a Huawei store, which is very much like the Apple stores that we have in major cities here. Beautiful glass entry. You go inside, and there's every possibility of smartphones and laptop computers, all of that. And these are Huawei's, which are the best, 5G phones available. But they were selling shiny new electric cars, also made by Huawei there. There are at least a dozen, I think it's closer to 24 new electric cars out in the market. I think Tesla is still the biggest electric car maker because it was the first in China. Their factory is in Shanghai. But they have a car called Make Your Dream, MYD, that is so state of the art. It's an eye popper, and people are able to buy them, so in a way now there's too much traffic on the streets of the major cities, but it's quiet because they're electric cars. It's also well controlled. And by the way, the subways under the streets are so good that, many people, including myself, prefer to use the subways. When I was in Beijing, I had to go to a book fair. One of my books was at the fair, so I wanted to see it. I took a taxi to get there, but it crawled through the traffic, so on the way back I took the subway. That was a really good idea because the subway's air-conditioned, it's quiet, state-of-the-art, safe. So things that I saw and enjoyed there made me think, we can do this, and it can be better. We should not be fighting China. We should be sharing with it and learning from it. And by the way, that was what happened back in the mid 1980s. When Deng Xiaoping started with the reform and opening up policy. He was shaking hands, with American presidents and making an invitation to bankers and U.S. corporations to go there and participate and help. And a very large number did. The Chinese made it very attractive. And in a way, that's one of the reasons that the threats of war against China could be prevented, because a lot of people, ordinary business people, see that it's a whole lot better to do business with the Chinese than to fight them.
And of course, the airports compared to American airports?
Well, they're much bigger. The thing is, the Chinese population is just huge. And of course, the airports are relatively new. A 20-year-old airport is about the average. The Beijing airport is gigantic, and of course they have flights going everywhere in the country and in the world. That's true in Shanghai. And it's interesting too, because the bullet trains are really the preferred way for people to travel between cities. The train stations are gigantic. You could fit several of the largest U.S. train stations inside either of the two big train stations in Shanghai and the three in Beijing and so on. These are gigantic stations, and people are on the move everywhere. It's quite interesting. That there's a lot of optimism in China because they've just been seeing one improvement after another, and even during, for example, 2008, when we were in a huge financial crisis, what do they call it, the Great Recession, there they didn't have it because the government and the banks teamed up to invest in gigantic infrastructure projects that made sure that everybody who needed a job had one, building the country. And the result has been an amazing infrastructure. These are things we need to do rather than putting all the money into the war machine. And my message basically is it can be done. We can do it, but we have to team up to get it done.
I totally agree with you about a mixed economy, and that's how I'm a socialist, but I would want some capitalism too as well. I think just if we nationalize the oil industry, nationalize the banking industry, there's just some major things that, just to get those profits, get our hands on that money. But let me ask you a question, Mr. Knight, real quick. But the thing is, our country is so corrupt. No matter what we do, they're still going to bleed us for every dime we got. Do you have that there in China? The corruption, the government corruption, and the paperwork and red tape?
Well, in fact, most of the corruption comes from the market side, the capitalist side of the economy. And it's good to know, when I say mixed economy, you have a situation where a little over half of the economy is private and the other half is public. The public side is what they call the commanding heights. The banks, the state-owned enterprises, which are the major manufacturing companies, as well as the essentially about 90% of the financial institutions. And the key is to a large degree the nationalization of the banks and tight partnership between the banks and the state planning apparatus. Bear in mind that back in 2008, several banks failed and had to be rescued and consolidated. And, of course, General Motors had to be rescued, and the government took over a large percentage of the company, but then gave it back. Now, what I'm suggesting is that as things get worse here and the economy runs into trouble, as it is essentially guaranteed to do, instead of essentially bailing out, the banks can be taken over. They can be made into public utilities. And yes, there still would be corruption, but a whole lot less corruption than there is now, in which the combination of the banks, the oil companies, the big pharma, and the military-industrial complex control the whole economy and the whole political structure.
And the media.
It's true that... Sorry?
And the media they control, too.
Well, of course, they if they don't own it all right, which they come close to, they control it economically and in many other ways. And you know, the propaganda against China is that it's even worse there. Yes, there's corruption there, and it's interesting. Back in 2012, when Xi Jinping took over, he said, "Look, we're going to have to make a campaign against corruption," and he knew very well what the corruption was caused by. You know, the mixed economy is significantly decentralized, so that the provinces and the municipalities around the country basically control and manage the development projects. So take, for example, a city like Chongqing in the southwest China, a small city of only 35 million people. You know, the government of the city is in charge of managing the development projects. But in large part, those development projects are supplied by private companies. Those private companies are fighting tooth and nail and paying to be selected for these development projects, and that causes corruption. The government policy of common prosperity has been put in place to essentially rein in that corruption by putting an emphasis on assuring that the needs of the vast majority of the population are met first, meaning in housing, education, health care, and transportation. They won't kill all the corruption, but they have certain guarantees that are reinforced by the fact that the banks themselves are public utilities controlled by the government. Those are things that can be done here. They're not, you know, this is not some kind of red dictatorship. This is common sense, and it can be done. And the results can be that instead of what we have here, where approval ratings for national leaders run in the 30s, there they run in the 90s. And why is that? It's because people are getting what they need, and that can happen here. And it will take a mixed economy to do it. We're not talking about losing the services of mom and pop stores or even
Right.
McDonald's.
Right.
It's interesting. McDonald's and Starbucks are very big in China. People don't really know that, and of course Tesla's a very
Coca-Cola,
big operation. Coca-Cola too.
Mr. Knight,
yeah.
I hate to. I have so many more questions for you. I'm going to beg you to come back, but we're out of time today. Okay, Mr. D. Knight, Knigh. I told you it was going to go fast, right? I told you, man.
It's great. Yeah.
Now, the two books, I want people to run out right now, and you can start reading them right now. You can download them as, what are they called? Kindles. My Whirlwind Lives, Navigating Decades of Storms, and the other one is A Realistic Path to Peace, From Genocide to Global War, and How We Can Stop It. The website for Mr. Knight here is realpathtopeace.com. 1 minute. What can you leave us with?
Well, you can also go out to dknight.blog and see all that stuff. And let me also say that if you really want to get in touch, you can always send an email to info@realpathtopeace.com. It'll come to my inbox, and I'll respond. Tell me if you want to be on my mailing list. That way you'll know what I'm doing, and can often get discounts on my books.
Oh, there you go. Mr. Knight, thank you so much. Okay, good night.
Thank you very much.
Talk to you soon.